Just continue lunch if you would, and your dessert. I'm Hank McCamish, Chairman of the Georgia Public Policy Foundation. I simply want to welcome each of you here today. You're in for a real treat. And to introduce Governor Campbell, we've asked Whit Ayers, who's a member of our Board of Governors, who for 5 years was the Budget and Policy Director for Governor Campbell when he was in South Carolina, and he finally left the bureaucratic realm and went into the private enterprise aspect of it. Whit's doing a tremendous job for the help he's giving us. And I asked Whit how would he describe himself, and he says he's a pollster and a public opinion researcher. So I guess you can hang any hat you want to on that. I know he does a phenomenal job in everything he is doing, and Whit, we appreciate everything you've done for the Georgia Public Policy Foundation. In particular, we appreciate your arranging for Governor Campbell to be with us today, and if you would now introduce him to Whit Ayers. When you go out, if your parking token, just tell them they're with the Georgia Public Policy Foundation, and there's no charge for the parking token. So when you leave today, just tell them you're with the Georgia Public Policy Foundation luncheon, and there is no charge for the token.
Thank you very much, Hank. It's been my privilege to know our speaker today for the better part of a decade as a mentor, as a teacher, and as a boss. Our country has a great many good conservative thinkers, but Carroll Campbell is not only a creative conservative thinker, he's a creative conservative doer as well. He has set a new standard in South Carolina for what a chief executive can accomplish when he's guided by strong conservative principles, but couples that with the political savvy and the courage to put those principles into action. I watched him when, barely 4 months into office, he took out his red pen and used his line item veto 287 times to rein in a bloated budget, and then turned around and got an overwhelmingly Democratic legislature to uphold every single one of those vetoes. I've watched him as he's taken on the educational establishment by demanding certain learning standards for national education goals and instituting creative ideas like a workforce initiative to upgrade the basic skills of workers in South Carolina factories so that they could be more competitive. I've watched him convince the Democratic legislature to cut taxes and give him the economic development tools that he needs to work, which he then turned around and took out and established a record in economic development that I think will be many, many years before anyone will equal, bringing in some 200,000 jobs and over $18 billion in new investment into a small southern state, capped by the huge BMW plant in Spartanburg, where spin-off jobs will be created all up and down the I-85 corridor from Charlotte to Atlanta. I watched him make the lonely decision as a hurricane loomed offshore to order the evacuation of the coast, knowing full well that if the hurricane veered off in another direction, as it very well could have at that time, that he would have been castigated by many voters for overreacting. But it was that tough decision that was later credited with saving hundreds of lives as Hurricane Hugo slammed into the coast. And I've seen him confound the skeptics by taking on the complete reorganization of South Carolina state government, reducing 79 agencies into 17, thereby saving the taxpayers multiple millions of dollars over the years. For that record, he has been honored by both Democrat and Republican governors as the current chairman of the National Governors Association. He has been recorded in numerous polls, some of them not even conducted by my firm, as the most popular governor in the country. It's my distinct honor and pleasure today to present to you one of the most intelligent, courageous, and politically savvy, creative conservatives in the country, Carroll A. Campbell, Jr., the governor of South Carolina.
Whit, I was enjoying what you had to say more than what I'm going to say, and I want you to know that. I want you to take more time if you'd like to. But it was It was very nice of you, and you're very kind. Let me say this about Whit. Whit is one of those very gifted individuals who helped my administration, and one of those people that I was very sorry to see leave it. And I'm delighted that he still works with us sometimes on different subjects because he's a very talented and capable individual. I'm not going to make a long speech. I'm going to throw out a few concepts and some things and issues that we're facing, and maybe we can have a dialogue about them, because I'd rather do that than I had make somebody sit there and listen to a monologue. Let me tell you a little bit about my philosophy of government. My philosophy of government is basically Jeffersonian, I guess, because I don't think that government ought to do any more than it has to do, and it should not do for people what they can and should do for themselves. I firmly believe that. And I think the biggest problem that we have had in this country is that we have had a group of people to get into power, like we have in this administration, that really in their hearts believe the people of this country are not capable of making their own decisions, and they are smarter, and therefore they have to make the decisions for them. I mean, there's a difference in philosophy here. I believe in the private sector. There are a lot of people on the other side that believe in the public sector. I believe in the marketplace. There are a lot of people up in Washington that believe in the regulatory society instead of the marketplace. I have never seen us regulate ourselves into anything prosperous. Never. So I have a basic philosophy that I try to bring to government. I believe that people are responsible themselves for the consequences of the decisions they make. I think that one of the major problems that's wrong with society is that nobody is at fault for anything that happened to them in this society today. It's always somebody else's fault. And I think we have abandoned the idea that we have any personal responsibility. We can bring a child into the world and it's somebody else's to pay for. Well, it's not mine. I don't have to worry about it. Sure, I fathered the child or so forth, but that doesn't make any difference. Taxpayers will take care of it. So we have lost some personal responsibility. We've literally lost a rudder in this country, be we Republican or Democrat. We don't have any basic values that we test our society against anymore. We're out there in a world of relative values. And if you don't believe that, look at television and listen to what they said right after the LA riots and all of that. Why do you carry these guns and do it? Well, they got a gang down the street and they do it, and so they do it, we're going to do it. Everything's relative. It's okay if Jimmy and Johnny do something that's wrong, and if Jimmy and Johnny do something that's wrong, Sam can say, well, I did it because Jimmy and Johnny did it. They don't have any foundation. They're rudderless. And in a society today that we have in this country of ours, over 30% of the children coming into the world and growing every year in percentages illegitimate, with no foundation, we're headed in a direction that could have some really catastrophic consequences. Indeed, we're seeing a lot of those consequences. I believe that the most dignity that you can provide for a person is a job, and it's the best welfare program that's ever been invented, because it brings with it not only the income, but the dignity of doing something. And so I set out in South Carolina to put into place what I tried to do when I was in Congress. When you're a minority member of Congress and the Democrat Party controls and you're a Republican, it's hard to get a lot of things through. But there's one bill I got through the Congress, working with a Democrat legislator. The two of us pushed through a simple bill, and it said essentially this. This was back in the early 80s. If you bring a child into this world, that you are responsible for that child's well-being to the best of your ability, whether you are the mother or the father, married or not married. That is the first child support act that was ever passed in this country. I firmly believe that. I firmly believe that anybody that has brought a child in the world to the best of their ability is responsible for that child. I'm not responsible for your child, you are. And that is a philosophy that I brought into the federal government. All across this country now we have child support laws. All across this country, parents who have abandoned their children in child support and put them over to the system are now having to pay. It's the way it ought to be. That's being responsible for the consequences of a decision that you made some time ago. So we've got to get personal responsibility back. When I went into South Carolina, I looked at our state. I have a very high low-income minority population in my state. I looked at the educational levels of our people, the skill levels of our people, and I looked at what we could do to compete. And to be perfectly honest with you, we looked at all the states around us, and we said, what advantages do they have? What are they doing? Well, we looked at the education, we looked at all of the infrastructure and these things. We knew that we couldn't have any great, gigantic hub like Atlanta has as an airport. We couldn't compete on the infrastructure. So we said, how can we have something better, for instance, in Georgia and North Carolina, because they've got the air hubs. Let's concentrate on our ports. Let's make Charleston the best port. Charleston is now the second largest container port on the eastern seaboard. Let's concentrate on our strengths. Let's look at our infrastructure. And let's look at our tax laws and see where we need to be competitive. So we set forth to change the laws to be competitive. We cut the corporate income tax rate from 6 to 5%. We cut the personal income tax rate. We indexed the brackets of all of our taxpayers to inflation. We cut the capital gains rate. Indeed, the capital gains differential had been destroyed because our predecessor had linked our tax code to the federal code, and in that process it was automatically destroyed, and we put it back in. We put in something known as fee in lieu of taxes, so that if you invested $85 million or more, that you could have tax stability for 20 years on a negotiated rate. So that big companies would know that if a county council changed, that somebody wasn't going to double their taxes the next year. They could plan their financial investment, business-like stability. We also, at the same time, recognized we had a problem with our poorer counties, and that they weren't growing and didn't have the financial base. So we scaled a job tax credit between the wealthy and the poorer counties. I've seen your governor, he talked about it a lot over here, your current governor, and made some changes along some of the lines. But what we did is we put a higher job tax credit in the poorer counties, and then we scaled it down depending on the wealth of the county, trying to push jobs out. But we realized that we didn't have the infrastructure to do it, and we had to have a better tax base in those poorer counties, and we could not create it that way. So we created enterprise zones. You've heard a lot of people talk about them. If you'd like to see them, come over next door. I have them. They're there. They're not in somebody's mind or on somebody's paper. They work. They're there. I will bring you over and show you one in Anderson, South Carolina, and one in Greenville, South Carolina, and one in Florence, South Carolina. And I'll also show you the companies that are in them. What we did there was to say, okay, who has the assets to make things work and create the jobs, and how can we impact the poor area and the rich area all at the same time? We create the enterprise zone in the wealthier county with the infrastructure and essentially marry it to a poor county. By doing that, they get the higher job tax credits in the enterprise zone, but the revenue is shared back between the two counties, which increases the tax base for the small county and helps to fund their education programs, which are often lacking for funding. It works. Companies come in. They like tax stability. They move into things like this. And we've got them all over our state. So we tried to make ourselves competitive in a situation that would allow us to create the jobs that were necessary to get our people off of public assistance and into a productive capacity. We also expanded our technical programs so that we specifically train a workforce. And somebody comes into my state and they're going to hire 500 people. We find out what they need, what skills they are. We screen the workforce, we train the people, and they have a workforce ready to go. That's an investment in the infrastructure of your state. It's an investment in the minds of your people. If the company doesn't come, they still have the knowledge. If the company leaves, they still have the knowledge. And what we do in our inducements to come to South Carolina is we do them on two different levels. One is the value-added part. That is, if you're creating jobs and so forth, you make yourself eligible for the tax credits. The other is we invest in infrastructure. Roads, water, sewer, in the minds of our people. That's our level. We pulled out a Mercedes. I mean, we went to the line with Mercedes, a great company. We'd have loved to have had Mercedes. Everybody would have loved to have them. Georgia would have loved to have had them. We don't build companies for people. We do not pledge to buy product from the company over a period of time. We do not pay employees while we train them. We don't do those things because that's not good business. And we're not going to do it. And we were asked to do it, and we said, no, we don't do that. We're not going to do it. So what I'm trying to say to you is that we try to govern by a philosophy of the marketplace being in control, creating opportunities for people to help themselves, giving them the tools to prepare themselves to be able to take advantage of those opportunities. Now, everybody gave me a hard time about it. It'll never work. You're going to be in trouble. You're going to never pay the bills, and everybody wants more money every year. And well, in South Carolina today, last year we ran a surplus. This year we're going to have a couple of $100 million more than we had last year, I guess, to spend. We haven't raised any taxes since any general taxes since 1987, and that was only in a highway tax of 3 cents a gallon then to build our strategic roads and to set up an economic development fund to allow me personally, if a company came in, for instance, if you had a company coming in and you said, look, I want to know, can I get a road built? Instead of the state doing it and having to wait 2 years to get it, programmed into a state system, I say, sure. I'll take the money out of my strategic development fund. You can hire a contractor. We'll build your road. The road will be built before you get your foundation in. So it gave me the ability to operate quick. We did go to the private sector because I believe in public-private partnerships. I'm a great believer in the private sector. We went to the private sector, and in the private sector, we said we need some help in education. We're not doing very well in some areas, and I raised the money from the private sector and built a math science high school in South Carolina. Math science high school, everybody said it wouldn't work. It was limited enrollment. Doesn't take but about 130 kids a year, juniors and seniors. The reason I did that is North Carolina was taking my bright kids out of my state and high school up to the North Carolina School for Math and Science, and I said, I'm going to get them back. So we got them coming back. Well, out of our first class that we graduated, about 85% of them went out of state. They went to the MITs and to the Stanfords and to the, you name it. Last year, about 68% of them stayed in South Carolina in the new honors fast-track programs that were put into our universities to keep our brain power home. We also put in an initiative on workforce excellence that Whit mentioned. We did that to tell employers, and this is the way we posed it. Listen, if you've got a good employee with a good work ethic that you know is dependable and a hard worker, and you trade that employee for somebody with higher skills that may not have the work ethic, you may make a mistake. But if you invest in upgrading the skills of your existing employee in the workplace, then you're going to have a more valuable employee and a more loyal employee. We now have 434 companies and businesses around our state that actually run schools in the workplace. And it's an interesting thing because a lot of them will give 30 minutes in the afternoon if the employee will give 30 minutes. And they're in there on a partnership. There's nothing more rewarding for me now to walk into one of my colleges or universities 7 years later after we got into this and have somebody 45 years old walk up to me and say, I'm a student here. I went through and got my GED after I went through the workplace thing, and then I went in and got in it, and I'm a sophomore in college now. See, adults have knowledge. Too many people treat them like children. They may not be able to read and write, but they've got knowledge. They've lived. It's not too hard to unlock that if you do it right. So we try to do things that way. What about this country? And I'm going to close on this. This country of ours bothers me a great deal. It bothers me because there are those that do think that Washington has to run everything. They hamstring the states. I'll have to spend $60 million more this year on Medicaid alone in South Carolina just because of what Washington tells me to do. Of the mandates that I have out of Washington, we'll spend probably another $100 total million of the various mandates. We live with unfunded mandates. We've got the Clean Air Bill. We've got the Clean Water Act. We've got the Motor Voter Bill. I'm having to budget millions of dollars for motor voter. All of these mandated out of Washington. We're not investing in our people. We're investing in some sort of process. And we need to invest in our people. And we need to create those opportunities. Washington, having been there for 8 years, served on both the Appropriations and the Ways and Means Committees, Washington gets this inside the Beltway mentality, and then you get these gurus that come in and they think they know better, and they want to run everything. They have a bill going through. The governors got together, the governors, in the second summit that's ever been held with the president and all the governors, and we wrote the national education goals. What were they designed to do? They were designed to give parents information about how much their children were really learning. Because in schools today, you grade on the curve. Relativity. Not excellence, relativity. In the Olympics, which you're going to host, if you've got the high jump bar set here, and the guy that wins it comes from a nation with 250 million people, you don't lower the bar for the guy that came from a nation with 1 million people. He competes on the same level. What we've done in America is we've taken the bar of education and lowered it so everybody can jump over it. We want to make everybody happy. Mom and Daddy think Johnny is an A student. In the real world, Johnny's probably a C student. But on the curve, he's an A student. What we tried to do was to say, let's look at the international standards. Where do we really stand? And then instead of having a curve grading system, let's see where they stack up going up against the standard. How far up the ladder are they? An absolute. That's what we tried to do. What did the Congress and this administration try to do? They tried to take that idea. They have a bill going through now. They want to create a system in Washington where they approve your curriculum out of Washington, and where they approve your method of teaching out of Washington before they'll give you your federal funds. Total federal control. What are they trying to do in the health system? There are a lot of things we can do in the health system. We need it. We need portability in this society we live in. You don't have to create a federal bureaucracy to do that. All you have to do is to define and pass a law of tax deductibility in the package. The industry can do it. You don't have to hire bureaucrats. We need tort reform. It's not in this bill that they're sending now. $25 million a year is spent in defensive medicine practice because of fear of lawsuits. $25 billion a year. We need regulatory changes for insurance. Don't have a bureaucracy to do that. We need changes. Surely in this world, when I can carry a card in my pocket that will tell everything from the day I was born up to how much money I have in the bank to everything else, that we can do electronic transfer on payments to doctors out of a system instead of having to hire all the people to fill out all the papers and all the things that they do. Surely you can do it. I'm doing away with food stamps in my state as best I can. Why I have to get permission from Washington to do this. It's the right simple idea. I looked at it and we're losing $125,000 a month in food stamps being stolen out of the boxes of the people that they're mailed to. Then I looked at the cost of the people the state has to hire to put those stamps in an envelope to mail them out. And then I looked at the cost of the stamps on the envelope that we had to use to send them out and the cost of the envelopes. And then I looked at the underground economy out there and the number of people that own food stamps that we're having to subsidize in another program because they have used their food stamps. They've either been stolen, used on drugs, used on alcohol, but they didn't buy food. Well, it didn't take a genius to figure this out. We said, look, why don't we eliminate this underground currency? So we're now in the process, and we've got it going into 2 counties, and we're going statewide with it, but we have to do it incrementally because of all the rules and regulations. Where what we do is to take the amount of the food stamps, and you put it electronically into an account that can be debited by a little card that the person on food stamps has, and they go to the grocery store, and it won't approve anything except approved food items, because you've got little barcodes on what's approved and not coming out of all the grocery stores now. And they go in, and they can buy it. You don't mail anything out. There's no underground economy there. Only approved items can be bought with it. And it saves a heck of a lot of money. Why can't we do these things? These are the kind of things that we need to be doing in government, not trying to build more government in Washington. Less government, less people, and more freedom for the economy itself to prosper. That's the philosophy that I live with. That's the philosophy I try to keep in front of me. And that's a philosophy that makes it very easy for me to make decisions. Not every decision is easy, but sometimes it's easy to make them because you say, if it cuts this way or that way, even if I'm in doubt, I'm going to go the way that I think philosophically is the best. So I've given you a little overview of what I see in the country, a little overview of what I believe in, a little overview of what we're doing in the state of South Carolina. And I'd just like to stop and take some questions. But before I do, let me tell you a little story. It's a true story. Whit knows this story well. When we started out, people said, this stuff will never work. He'll fall flat on his face. Skeptics were plentiful. I don't have many skeptics anymore. Got enemies now, but I don't have many skeptics. When I was running for office in 1978, my district over there had never had a Republican congressman in the history of the state. And so I set out to get elected to Congress. And everybody said my opponent was going to win. He was a very popular guy, really nice fellow. And so we went on and on and on, and we hammered and hammered and hammered and worked and talked to people and told them what we believed in. And then we went down to this hotel that night of the election, and of course we'd rented a little ballroom, and we were going to have a celebration if we won, which nobody thought we were going to do. Hired a little band. And we went down there to wait on the election. Well, about 9 o'clock that night, CBS came on with this terrible television program and predicted my opponent won the election. There was nobody in my ballroom. The band wasn't playing. And by 10 o'clock or 10:30, everybody probably, except with the exception of, my immediate family and the paid staff, had kind of gone home. First cousins had left, everything, they just, it was patting you on the back and went out the door. Well, we sat there a while, and I was trying to explain to my 2 sons at that time, who were 9 and 5 years of age, that we want to go down as a family, and you're going to stand up like men with your daddy, and we're going to congratulate our opponent and so forth. And my 5-year-old said, I'm not going to do it. And we had to sit down and talk it out and explain, what we had to do. And so we sat there and talked for probably an hour and a half, and watched on television the celebration at my opponent's his ballroom the hotel he was in. They were dancing and they were kicking up their heels and had a great time. And we decided we'd wait a little while and then we'd go down. And so our returns started coming in a little better. And about the middle of the night, CBS came back on and predicted that the race had become too close to call in the 4th Congressional District of South Carolina. So we decided we'd wait this one out, and on over in the wee hours of the morning, I saw the greatest television show I've ever seen, and they came on and predicted that they were wrong on the first one, that there was somebody else had won the race, and it happened to be me. So we go down to this ballroom where there hadn't been anybody, not a soul. And it was packed, and by this time it's 1:30 or 2 o'clock in the morning. And I walked through the crowd, and people were cheering and patting me on the back. Carroll, we did it, didn't we? By golly, we did it. Yeah, well, we did it. Well, I was happy as a lark. And I looked around, and this is the gospel truth. I looked around and couldn't help but notice, but quite a few of them had my opponent's buttons on. They had been over there celebrating with him until I won. But they'd been on my side the whole time. So that, it just tells you, and that's what we've been able to, I think, do, is to show in our state that you can govern this way, you can grow a state this way, you can deal with problems this way, and it does work. And so I don't have that many skeptics anymore. As I did say, I have enemies. I have those that disagree. They want the government to do it. I don't. Thank you. Now, anybody got any specific? Yes, ma'am.
My name is Joan Mayer. I'm a member of the Cobb County Crime Commission. I have a twofold question.
Sure.
Your stand on the death penalty and the other idea that if you are sentenced for 20 years but you get out for 2, how do you feel about that?
Well, number one, we have the death penalty in the state of South Carolina, and unfortunately, and I am not a bloodthirsty person, I have had to put to death under my administration quite a few people. Most of them had killed people. They deserved it. They did it. And I have to tell you that every time you face that, if you're a leader, unless you haven't got any heart at all, you'll sit down and pray for yourself when you make that decision. And you'll ask somebody to forgive you for what you've done and hope that you've made the right decision. So I believe in the death penalty. I've never commuted a sentence. If I ever saw one that I thought needed commuting, though, I would not hesitate to do it. But that is my stand on the death penalty. I think that it is necessary, and I think that it is just in some cases. As far as the crime, the biggest problems that we have is that the sentence and the relativity of the sentence to the crime and the time that lapses in there is so far apart in many instances that it's not really a deterrent. That's the same thing with the death penalty. I mean, they take us 8 to 10 years. So it's really not something that people that commit those crimes worry about too much. The problem with the crime is that the penalty needs to fit the crime. It needs to be absolute, it needs to be swift, it needs to be sure. If you're a first-time offender, you ought to have some chance to try to pull out. I mean, to get out of a situation, other than a violent crime. I'm talking about shoplifting and things like that. We fill up our prisons with those people, and then the courts order us to let people out that have committed serious crimes because our prisons are full of people that ought to be out there doing restitution or cleaning up the roads or doing something like that. We need to have sentencing that means something. If you have committed a violent crime and you get a sentence of 10 years, you ought not to be able to build any good time off of that until you serve at least half of your sentence before you're even eligible to start building good time. Why do you need to let them build good time? Somewhere inside those prisons, if you haven't given them something to discipline with by losing good time, you lose control internally. So it is a tool internally of management that is necessary. Because if they get the same thing for killing people in prison or to get rioting and all as they do for somebody trying to be a model inmate and get out, then you have destroyed what you really ought to be doing internally for those that can be helped. But if they've committed a violent crime, they should have a determinate sentence that they cannot get any days off of until they've started earning good time after they've done half the sentence. That leaves some discretion with the judge. And I think that's a very good way to go, and I think that's probably where we'd like to go. We're turning out too many now. When I first went in as governor, I was ordered by the court to release, about, how many, what was it we were ordered to release? 1,000 criminals or something like that. And I refused to do it. And we had a little bit of a standoff. The reason I refused to do it was because they were going to release them only on the number of days that they got left. That's the way the court wanted to do it, not on the crimes that they'd committed. And I said, look, if we're going to be forced to release anybody, I'm going to categorize these people as nonviolent and violent, and I will not release anybody that's committed a violent crime. And the court backed down. And we categorized our people so that when we had a forced early release, the people we let out were the bad check writers or the shoplifters or something like that. Nothing involving violent crime. We need to differentiate in crimes better in this country. And we need to use our resources. I'm spending a lot of money over there. It doesn't make sense for me to lock up somebody that wrote a bad check for 2 years at $18,000 a year when I can stick an anklet on that person, have an electronic surveillance, let them go home at night, go to work in the daytime, and pay the money back. It just doesn't make sense. So we need, in this criminal justice system, to have swift, sure punishment for people that do crimes. It needs to be balanced against the crime as to what they need to have. The people that commit violent crime, by the way, I happen to, in my state, and we have put it in this way, a person that deals in drugs commits a violent crime. Now, the problem that we're having all over the country is that the big guy knows some people that they can turn in and cut a deal and get and drop the charge or lower the charge. We need to stop that, and we need to be able to go after that. Anybody that sells any kind of drugs to children, I say committed a violent crime, they ought to be treated like a violent criminal. So I have, exactly what I believe in this area, and I wish I had a magic answer to tell you we knew how to stop it all. I don't have that. Yes, sir.
On the direction of the National Republican Party, your pro-growth, free enterprise, limited government model, which you so passionately articulated, which I think is an excellent one for the national scene also. Where do you see the National Party headed? We kind of, from what I've seen, and what's frustrating to me is that we seem to have two separate models. You've got the Bush model of higher taxes and higher regulations and higher mandates, which you talked about. And then you have the old classic, more pro-growth, supply-side Reagan model of free enterprise and limited government and more deregulation. Where do you see as we head to the 94 and 96 elections? Where do you see the National Party headed? Which model are they going to?
Well, I think that we have to draw a contrast, obviously, with the governing party and the governing president and what we believe in. We'd better be able to be more than againers, though. Republicans too often make the mistake of being against everything and not having something to put out there that they're for. And if you're going to be against anything, you better have an alternative. And that is where we break down a lot. Our people a lot of times have been very good at going out and complaining against something and not being able to come up with a way to solve the problem. And so we have to deal with this on as a two-edged sword. We need to run against those things that we philosophically disagree with. But where they're solving a problem according to them by doing this, we need to be able to put up a total different model to solve the same problem. And we have, in many instances, failed that side of it. And I think that as we try to develop over time what we can do, that's where we will have credibility. I'll take this health care situation that we have now. I can go through it and give you a litany. I know it upside one side and down the other. I mean, they can do everything under the federal government. You probably don't know this, including raise your taxes without any vote of anybody at any time. All they have to do is have the health board certified that they need a state to make a better effort. The Secretary of HHS sends a letter to the Secretary of the Treasury which says he will levy a tax on all business in that particular state to the level the Secretary deems appropriate for health care in that particular area. That's in that law. That is the proposal of the Clinton administration. This is government at its absolute worst. How are they selling it? They're selling it on a Chicken Little theory. Sky is falling. They've created the greatest crisis since Jimmy Carter created the energy crisis back in the 1970s, where we were going to have $100 a barrel of oil and it went down to 18. But by golly, we'd had the lines and rationing and all that. Price controls and rationing have never worked in the history of this country. They're going to ration medicine. People better understand that. You're going to lose free choice. People better understand that. We can be against and stand up on those. We can also stand up for free choice. We can also stand up for portability. We can also stand up for tort reform. We can also stand up for antitrust changes that let hospitals work together to quit duplication of very expensive machinery and technology. We can stand up for IRAs, medical IRAs. We can stand up for all types of things that deal with the problem. We can take the 37 million people, which is a bogus figure, but let's assume it's right, that don't have insurance. The public assumes they're poor. They're not poor. Medicaid has insurance for the poor. We can stand up and say, okay, you got 37 million people. Who are they? They want to take everybody and put them into one big, funnel, and everybody comes out the same at the bottom. Sound like education, same bar, we're going to all get over it. What if we just took that 37 million people, and I'm just purely, hypothetical, and let's say that, and these don't break out exactly like this, so I'm not giving you, but let's say that a third of those people are workers in transition, and that's not too far off. They're people that are out of a job, looking for a job, and, they lose their insurance. That's the contention of the Clinton administration. Well, if you say, okay, how do we deal with that group? Well, let's look at it two ways. Number one, if you work for a company that gave you insurance, the COBRA law says you have to keep that insurance in force for a year, but the person that has left your company has to pay the premium. So you have an insurance vehicle already there. You don't have to have a new bureaucracy. It's already there. So that person can buy that insurance. Well, let's assume they don't have enough money, and so you're going to have to try to do something for them. Do you create a new federal bureaucracy and do it? Is that the only way to solve the problem? No, I'll give you another way. Suppose the day they become eligible for their unemployment compensation, that they go out of work, that you have a formula that gives a payment scale to help them keep their policy at a portable level, not a Cadillac policy, the policy that everybody else is going to be able to buy, at a portable level by just triggering into your unemployment payment a co-payment with the company that's keeping the policy. You have handled that problem. You haven't hired anybody. You haven't created a new bureaucracy, but you have kept those people insured over that gap, if that's your objective. So there are other ways to do things. And I just throw that out to tell you that is one way to do it. There's another way you can deal with some of the problems that are out there. A lot of those people that are uninsured are self-employed people. Why? We don't let them deduct 100% like General Motors gets to deduct off what they give their executives and their unions. If you're going to give a big corporation 100% tax deduction for insurance for its employees, then why in the world isn't John Doe accountant or Bill Jones lawyer or Betty Smith that runs the flower shop or Jill Jones over here that is a psychologist or somebody that's in business in a very small way? Why can't they deduct 100% of their cost of insurance too? You give them 100% deductibility like you give the big companies, and they will solve their own problem. It doesn't create a bureaucracy. These are the kinds of things that the Republicans ought to be stepping up to the plate with alternatives to fight with. And you can go down the whole list of these people like that. And so those are the kinds of things that I think we need to be focusing on, and that is how do we solve problems while we condemn what maybe they're doing that we think is wrong. Yeah.
One other aspect of this are the mandated coverages that are in all of this. What have you done in South Carolina? We have 33 mandated coverages here in Georgia, which inflate the policy so that somebody cannot really buy a standard policy. They have to have all these other frills on it.
We have more than we need. And I'm going to be very blunt with you and tell you something. We have the hardest time in the world because in state legislatures, most of the trial lawyers have a very strong lobby in there, and so do special interests. And so it's difficult. We have won things like tort reform in our state. We did it in our rural areas and got people back into obstetrics out in the rural areas. We have trimmed down some of the some of these frills. But let me tell you something else that we're facing. And I'll go back, and we continue to try to keep it in what's real medical care. But where they're going, I mean, if you want a root doctor under what they've got up there, you're going to get a root doctor. I mean, that's everybody's qualified in these systems. The biggest problem that we're going to have is to getting a definition of what is a necessary policy for people and having equity. Let me tell you one of the great flaws of what Bill Clinton is proposing. He is proposing class warfare. Period. He is playing to his constituency. Period. And I can prove that very simply by just explaining this to you. They propose that if you're an individual that buys your policy, or that you're a small business or small company or whatever, or a new company starting up, that you can then only give your employees this portable policy. That's all you can deduct. That's all your employees can have. If you give them any more, they will be taxed on the excess, and you will be taxed on giving them the excess. That doesn't apply to Chrysler, Ford, and General Motors. It doesn't apply to Caterpillar. Read these ads in the papers of all these companies that are for it. They are out of this stuff. They have created 4 classes of the insured under what he's doing. John Q. Public is down here in this policy. Small business is down here in this policy. Medium-sized business is down here. Most big business is down here. But if you're in the big unions, you get to keep 100% of what you've negotiated. It is tax-free, and your employer gets to deduct 100%. If you're on Medicare, the defined policy for Medicare is better than the defined portable policy for those who will buy it. They are liberalizing Medicaid. They're liberalizing Medicaid and shrinking down what the private sector is paying for, and you're creating a different level there. They're playing to the inner cities, the big unions, all of this in this whole process. And finally, they are opting all federal employees out of this. 4 different classes. This is equity by Clinton. 4 different classes of insureds in America in the interest of equity. I mean, we've got some major problems, and we have to attack them. So, you know, I think that we're going to have to take on the problems of trimming down and getting to what you really need. Portability, tort reform, those things are necessary if we're going to get it under control, and we can. Yes, sir.
About your own health care, Tennessee just got their waiver, and I understand that you have petitioned for a waiver. How does your program differ from?
What we're trying to do, the biggest cause of health problems in America today is cost shifting. The federal government has 2 programs, Medicaid and Medicare. Medicaid and Medicare do not pay the cost of the program. Medicaid pays about 58% of the cost of going to the hospital. That means that if you go to the hospital, you shift it over to the paying patient over there, the rest of it. Medicaid uses the emergency room much more than anybody else. Last year in my state alone, we had over 600,000 people go to the emergency rooms on Medicaid for non-emergency items. The cost shift to the paying people, the patients in the hospital, was $96 million in Little South Carolina last year. If you did it in Georgia, it'd probably somewhere around 150 million to 200 million cost shift. Medicaid, where government pays for it, unless you have first-party responsibility, where somebody has to make an economic decision that's going to cost me money to do this, needs to be under managed care. You can put it under managed care. You can get it back to the primary care physicians on the front end of it. They can go to a doctor. It's better medicine anyhow because you're literally doing preventive care, primary care, instead of after-the-fact medicine at the most expensive level. The people involved have no incentive whatsoever to do that. It doesn't make any difference what it costs. They're not going to pay for it. So if you've got to put discipline into that group one way or another, and the discipline there either has to be economic, where they have an absolute copayment. Everybody says you can't do that because they don't have any money. If they own a government check and they go to a dadgum hospital room, I don't mean to sound callous or cold, but if they go to a hospital emergency room for a hangover on a Monday with a headache, and it costs $150 to go, as a non-emergency item, then they ought to have something deducted from whatever they're getting from the government, about $10 a visit, so they understand there's an economic consequence. That's the biggest problem we have in our whole health system. There's no first-party payments. Now, you know, that if you put them on managed care in the system, then you can do it. What has the government done? Why are we in trouble? And I'll answer this and quit this subject, but the government does not pay physicians enough to handle Medicaid patients. They lose money on them. They literally lose money. In my state, the reimbursement level to a primary care physician for a normal visit is $20 and some odd cents. Cost of handling them with the paperwork and the extra thing is over $32. Why won't they handle them? They're losing money. But they're going to the emergency room at $150. You let me manage care and get them out of the emergency room, get them to the doctors. I can pay the doctors $32 if I can just bring down some of the savings out of the emergency room. You've got to get the federal government's permission, of course. But, I mean, we can do it.
I would just like, what you're saying is absolutely true regarding all of these things, facts about the medical. How are we going to get this out to the people that really need to hear it? Because I don't hear anybody except a very small voice that's saying these sort of things. How do we get this out?
Well, we don't control the media. And they have a simple strategy. The sky is falling. I've got a health care card. It'll keep you safe for the rest of your life. Simple message. And it's very hard to go against a simple message with complicated things. Hillary stood up another day. I saw that. It sticks in my mind. It's what scares me. And she held her fist up, not her hand, her fist, and said, I don't have time to worry. Somebody asked her a question about small companies and how are they going to pay, and what about the details of the plan. She said, I don't have time to worry about unfunded companies that are out there, and the details don't matter. It's the big picture that counts. That was her statement. See, they're speaking in this thing. We're going to make you safe. It's the big picture, the sky is falling, and we're going to save you. It's a created crisis. And so, in order to deal with that, we've got to say, okay, we agree with you. We ought to have universal access. We want to do that. We just don't want the government to do it, and we don't want this, and here's what we want to do. We have got to have something to go down the line and beat them, and I don't want a lesser of two evils. I want something that's worth doing, and we do have Republicans in the Congress that are going forward with plans that are really not much lesser of two evils, and we need to get them together. Yes, sir?
How do you feel about real school choice versus trying to reform the public schools?
Well, trying to reform the public schools is the hardest thing I've ever been involved in my life. What we tried to do was to give some measure of the public schools, hoping we could give information to parents so they'd demand change because their children weren't learning anything. The teachers' union is extremely strong, and I think you're going to have some choice factors in there. Does it work? One of the things I did with this math science school I told you about a while ago was this, and it was very simple. It made my public schools sit up and realize there was some competition out there, and they all upgraded their math science offerings to try to keep their best and brightest kids from leaving. Competition helps. However you get it, whether it's charter schools, choice, whatever it is, you've got to get some competition in this arena.
Governor Campbell, thank you so much. Thank you. And personally, I thank each one of you for being here today and your support of the Georgia Public Policy Foundation. I wish that we could move you from South Carolina to Georgia.
Hey, I got some Democrats over there that want me to move from South Carolina to Georgia.